Brian, is AI going to cure cancer?
Think it's highly likely, but I don't think it's in the way that the big pharmaceutical companies and tech companies are talking about.
What do
How
you
are they
mean?
talking? They're saying, hey, we're going to use AI to come up with new synthesis of medications, new drugs. And so they're going to be able to iterate and go through all these different ideas and concepts and how does this work with your cellular structure, and they're just going to be able to replicate and simulate. That's the word I'm looking for. Simulate a bunch of different things quickly and more efficiently than doing it in a laboratory mechanically and physically. However, I don't think that is going to be the answer. I think what we're going to find is people with cancer, particularly if we look at stage 4 cancers over the last 50 years in the United States, have had very little improvement. Cancers peaked in the US in 1991 and they've dropped ever since. But the only reason they've dropped is not because of better medications, it's because less people are smoking. So we haven't really had an improvement, particularly in late stage cancers, in a very long time. We look at lymphomas and things like that over the last 40 years. There definitely have been improvements in those. But once you get to stage 4 of just about anything, we haven't made much progress. And yet, you can go online and you can find a bunch of anecdotal stories of people that had these cancers and cured themselves somehow, right? And there's people that claim there's like naturopathic oncologists and these types of things, and they're all over the place. And so, what I think AI is going to help us do is figure out what's the commonalities and what's the things that aren't valid in what they're saying. What did they do that actually made sense, and what is completely snake oil and was just not causal, but just correlated? It was just something they did, but it really didn't impact them. And so, one of the ideas that comes from this is, okay, you have two different groups sort of here. You have the naturists, and you have the pure standard medical. And one says, what's the argument from the naturalists against the pure medical ones, or the pure pharmaceutical ones? Oh, it's all about money. They're just in it for the money, and they're doing whatever they can to make money. And if they can't get the FDA to approve it, which I can't get FDA to approve if orange juice cured cancer, FDA is never going to prove that because there's no patentable piece to that. Okay, it's an interesting argument. In the United States, there's about $200 billion a year, a little less than that, spent on oncology drugs. But the supplement industry is also about $200 billion a year in the United States. So for one to say, hey, you're spending money and it's all about the money, and the other to ignore that, wait a sec, you're also making money and charging people and these types of things, isn't quite honest, right? They both have a financial incentive. Now there are other incentives beyond that you can argue are misbalanced or whatever, or there's a whole lot less people selling oncology drugs than the millions that sell supplements. Sure, there's nuance there, but the pure, hey, it's about money is not a valid argument because both of them are making money. So the question then becomes who is actually using science? And there's something like 100,000 studies a year that are published without FDA approved pharmaceuticals. There's studies all over the world that are government funded, that are university funded, that are private philanthropy funded for testing strange things. What's resveratrol do on aging, and what does berberine do, and what does this or that thing? And so you go on the internet, and here's the 5 foods that cure cancer. I mean, go on YouTube; they're all over the place. Now the question is, how does AI help us figure out if that person's a quack or has any research behind it? And that's available today. How do you get that information? Well, you basically go to apps on ChatGPT, like the Consensus app. If you guys want to, I can share my screen and we can start going through that and
Yeah, let's
just
see
say,
it.
hey, is this thing actually going to cure cancer? Is there any research whatsoever in its ability to address cancer? And so while I'm pulling up my shared screen here, have you guys heard anything like that? Like some special hog's word or whatever? I don't even know if that's a real thing. That might just be in.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. CBD. My wife had breast cancer. Okay. We put her, there were anecdotal stories of CBD helping to reduce cancer sizes. So we put her on a regimen of CBD oil. I'd like to say that before she had her surgery to remove the tumor, she did not have a tumor. There was none on the scans, but insurance insisted she have surgery anyway. I'd like
What
to know.
screen? I think I'm
What?
sharing the wrong screen.
Number of people killed by medical act. Oh yeah, that looks low. Oh,
All
that's
right,
just
so am I sharing the chat GPT screen or something else?
Yeah, on consensus, right? The consensus GPT.
All right, so this is the consensus app. You just go to your, apps over here and whatever it is, explore your apps and add one and look for consensus. So consensus is looking for all studies. So one question I just recently asked it is how many people are killed by medical accidents each year, and it went and found several studies citing that. Whole different discussion, but so you said, Chuck, CBD oil. Does CBD oil have
cancer.
any beneficial impact on breast cancer specifically?
I would do breast cancer specifically, yeah, because
Yeah,
I
and that's, I think, a really good point. When you say cure cancer, not all cancers are the same, right?
very
If you have an actual lump and you have breast cancer, and this is not medical advice, so nothing we say today is medical advice. Don't listen to us for any of that. This is just helping you do research. That's all we're helping you do, is find questions that you can better ask to your oncologist and people that you're working with. That's our goal, not to try and diagnose anyone or give you any specific recommendations. If there is a lump there, cutting it out makes sense, right? Like the research on that, and we could look at that and see. It's just your outcomes from that, if there's a definable lump, are going to be way better to cutting it out versus doing nothing. And there's other ones that are like that. But your lymphomas, something like non-Hodgkin's lymphoma has like a 90% cure rate with chemo and radiation. I mean, it's 90% is pretty darn good. Like if you're gonna forego modern medicine when you have that good of a cure rate, that's a problem. But not all are that way. Pancreatic and so on are different. So the curing of the cancer, and this is where AI, I think, makes it really powerful, is an individual result. It's individual to you and other health concerns that you might have, as well as to the specific situation that you're in, what stage and so on. So let's see what we have here. CBD may have beneficial effects in breast cancer treatment through various mechanisms. So there's going into the details. There's the study that you can go and read. Synergistic effect with chemotherapy, a lot of things. For instance, if we were to look up here the effects of fasting, almost always fasting before and after chemotherapy, I've seen several studies that reference that, helps you. So it's not a don't do chemotherapy in this particular instance. It's what else can you do to work with it. So that's essentially what this one's saying. It may have synergistic, again, click, read the study. Anti-tumor. Oh, that's interesting. So that's actually reducing tumor growth. Now that's significant. Why is that significant? There's a huge difference between preventing cancer and what does that look like in your diet and your activities and clean air and all that kind of stuff, and removing existing cancer. These are not the same thing. And a lot of people often confuse those. So if it actually has been shown to do that, then that's impressive. Yeah, well, the tumor has no blood, it doesn't work. So that makes sense. Yeah, angiogenesis, not feeding the blood to the tumor would be huge. That's pretty interesting as well.
So Brian, just to
It's
jump in.
interesting to me. I'll point out one more thing. All these are relatively new studies, right?
Oh yeah.
So there is research that shows that as doctors, the longer they have been in the profession, the worse they get.
Yep.
The only exception to that is surgeons. But the longer they've been doctors, the worse they get. And part of the reason is 2020, 2019, 2021. Are they staying up on all of this research? And the reality is, whatever condition you have, whether it's cancer or something else, going to a GPT, to the consensus app, and saying, what's the most recent research? I guarantee you is going to give you more recent stuff than your doctor's aware of. They just can't keep up with every issue, with every patient, with every situation. And so this is a way to fill in those gaps. Go ahead, Rob.
So Brian, this is publicly available, right? Consensus isn't your tool. Like this is a publicly available GPT.
Yeah. You just go to where it is, my GPTs, or I don't even remember where the setting is because I'm already in the app to add your new GPTs and just search consensus. And there's a few of them. Consensus isn't the only one, but consensus is like 200 million or some crazy number of scientific papers are out there. And I would also be very careful. So when you're talking about science, let's just look at one. This one's the most interesting to me. So let's see if the reference actually is there. It's not always. It's worth pointing out that these apps have a big limitation. The big limitation for these apps is all they are doing is looking at the abstract. Why is that a limitation? Because sometimes the data within the data sets
Mhm.
are much more important. Maybe the sample size is too small. Maybe the effects are very small. What do I mean by the effects? If you smoke cigarettes, your chance of getting lung cancer are like 1,000% higher than if you don't. It's like a 10x factor. But the research that shows that processed meats, eating bacon, leads to colon cancer, it's like a 17%. So one's 1,000, one's 17. Now, you then would want to look at the data and say, okay, well, that's a really relatively small change, or the sample size, what they control for. Like, there's more nuance to it than just, hey, what did the abstract say? And so understanding those things, particularly when your life is on the line, when we're talking about your personal health or the health of your family members, matters. You can't just read the abstract and say, yep, here we go. So at this point, you have the abstract, it gives you this analysis. If this is a serious thing that's affecting my family, I'm going to go read the entire report and get an idea of what's in the data set, not just what the AI tells me is coming from the abstract. It's
So
unfortunate that the AIs don't go through the full data. I don't know why they don't, because certainly they have the capability to, but all of the ones I've been able to find totally
Just that.
relying on the abstract. The
that's
other reason
another
I'll be a little conspiratorial here is somebody pays for these and they want the abstracts to say a certain thing, whether it's the pharmaceutical companies paying for it, or a university that has an idea, or a nonprofit, an NGO, nonprofit government organization. They'll have an angle, they'll have a bias, and they want you to come with some sort of answer. And so often this abstracts will say enough that appease the backers, even though the data itself
Doesn't
is
line up.
not, if you actually broke it down. But the reality is 98% of people just read the abstract and there you go. So
there's another area there where AI can help, because I'm sure a lot of people do not feel comfortable reading medical research and actually understanding it and processing it. So one of the other cool things you can do is actually take the research that the abstract, and then download the paper and upload that to AI to read it as well with you. And as you read it, you can ask it specific questions and go into details and in depth to get understanding of that more than just your own, understanding of what you read. So that makes the barrier a lot easier. So you don't have to be a medical professional to understand this, where in the past you used to, because it could break it down. It can give you in a less technical term to understand exactly what the research says and, what it's actually giving you.
well, then you can go deeper. So I just did a version of what you said, Greg. Now, again, this is just from the abstract. You would have to sign up to Consensus and get an account and whatever else. Then you can feed the entire paper into the AI. Let me see. You can dig deeper. Any other studies to confirm the anti-tumor properties of CBD and other types of cancer? And then you start going into it. I would also say, like, are there any studies that show what's our natural default? Our default is to, anytime I find information that confirms my preconceived notion, I just sort of run down that rabbit hole. But you need to stop and at some point say, wait a second, are there any studies that show negative effects of CBD? Now, those negative effects might not be related to cancer. Maybe they're related to heart disease, where you also have high blood pressure. These are the things where AI is going to be able to help you, where your doctor's not going to make all these connections, because they have all these patients and they're seeing you super quickly and they're not going to know all your history. And so going always on the, hey, what's the good and what's the bad is crucial to getting the full picture. So
Brian,
yeah, a few more studies, interesting. Bladder cancer, glioblastoma, colorectal cancer, lung cancer. Okay, so
Bunch of others.
and that's interesting. Again, look at the dates: 2021, 2021, 2020. This is where AI can stay on top of these things. And really, what's the ideal situation? Your doctor is sitting there in an appointment with you and asking the AI these questions with you, and then helping you interpret them. That would be amazing. Or before you come in, the nurse does the check, they ask you your questions and how's your health and blah, blah, blah. And they look at your medical history and they have all your records. At that point, the AI should just be going through all your records and making the connections and doing this research. So that when the doctor comes in and says, oh yeah, there was a new study about this in the last 3 years. This is something we should talk about. Or, hey, let me look at this. Maybe even a day before you arrive, so they can go read this study if it's relevant to your case. I mean, you have cancer. Like, this is important stuff to read and understand, right? And so that would be, in my mind, the perfect, the best use of it is use the trained oncologist to look at these things.
Is it even
so
worth having that conversation?
Say it again.
Is it even worth having that conversation with an oncologist? Because they probably won't know as much as a highly trained model, right? They can look at this data.
Tell you what my wife's oncologist said about CBD stuff. He said that she was wasting her time and money and just being stupid. He's also the guy that wanted to do the surgery afterwards,
Yeah, I think that's the trick, Rob. I think that not all people, doctors or people, are open-minded. Not all people want to look at additional information. Like, this is where you say, wait a second, I get that you don't think CBD oil is good, but here's 6 studies that show that it's useful. So have you read these studies? Oh, well, no, I didn't read those. Are you going to read these studies? Because, like, it is kind of my life here. This allows you to advocate for yourself without the, hey, some YouTuber told me CBD oil is a thing. Because that's what they're assuming. That's what the doctor is thinking on the other end, because they're not reading through all these journals and studies, right? So,
well, that's a powerful thing. That what you mentioned there about this YouTuber told me, because presumably if you watch that video, you might have watched other stuff, and then your bias, then you start to feed your own bias, right? By searching for things that might lead you to believe that CBD does cure this or does prevent this. So what tips do you have for people to avoid that, right? To try and stay in the middle, to stay balanced? Because this is tough, and this is kind of exhausting.
It's, if you ask a few key questions, does this help with my particular situation? So, I mean, I'll give you a personal example. It wasn't cancer, but I had thyroid issues. And I asked my endocrinologist, a long-term endocrine, decades in the industry, hey, do any supplements have an effect on endocrine, my levels? And she was like, oh, no, those have nothing to do. Just take levothyroxine. Here's your, artificial hormone replacement. Well, so I went to AI and said, hey, is there anything that affects hormone levels? And it was funny because at the doctor's office, she's like, well, we did one test and it's a little bit off. We need to do another test. I'm like, why do you need another test? Well, it can change. Like, what can affect that? Well, it just varies. Okay, but what makes it vary? Or I'm an engineer. Like, there has to be an input and an output here. And she had no answer. And so that's when I went to AI and said, what can affect it? And it gave me this whole list of things: zinc, selenium. I can't remember all of them. They're in there. But there were like 4 or 5 different ones that do affect thyroid function. And I was like taking like 3 of them. And so they asked me that in the input interview. They said, are you taking any supplements? And I gave them the list. So she knew in her records that I was taking supplements, 3 of which have an impact on thyroid function. But when I went to do the second test, I stopped all my supplements and my numbers got worse. I was like, well, that's an interesting correlation here. And I had studies that show, hey, these things do have an effect on the thyroid. And so, honestly, I'm nervous to go back to the doctor and say, so, doc, like, I'm just some dude that knows nothing about this, but these studies do show, these supplements have an effect. Do you still want to work with me? Like, are you going to help me understand this, or are you just going to give me hormones? And the challenge, and I get it from the doctor's side, is they are only allowed to prescribe the things that are FDA approved, which are patentable, so if she said, no, don't worry about taking the hormones, just take your list of
supplements,
whatever they're called, supplements. Like, I'm not sure that they're legally allowed to do that. Maybe in the UK it's different. So what do you have in the US? So in the US, you then have this entire separate group of people called functional medicine practitioners, chiropractors, and so on, that do not provide medical advice. Right. Now, some of them do because they are officially doctors, but then they still have to sort of be careful on what they prescribe and how. And it's like anything. Some of them are good and some of them are terrible. They're, literally recommending snake oils or essential oils or something that it makes no effect, but they make money off of selling them to you. And like, if there's a financial incentive, you're going to get people that are unscrupulous and dishonest. And so, again, it allows you to say, well, my chiropractor said that this Ayurvedic technique was going to help me. Well, does it help? Is there any research to back this up? Go to the AI and ask and see. And if there isn't, then you get to decide, well, it doesn't seem like there's any evidence that this helps, but I've heard enough anecdotal that I want to now try it. Well, that's up to you, right? But at least is there any science to back it up? But the claim, which is very common on the, hey, everybody needs radiation and chemo, and I mean, I've talked to my oncologist before. Hey, does diet make any difference? Absolutely not, is what he says. Okay, what about alcohol? No impact. It's like, well, does alcohol
I'm not a doctor, but I feel like I don't need ChatGPT for that.
Cancer. What's that?
So I'm not a doctor, but I feel like I can answer this one.
Yeah.
And this is like, if you've ever talked to doctors that are highly specialized, they all just look at the one organ that they're dealing with. And the reality is, I'm pretty sure alcohol is a type 1 carcinogen, like along with cigarettes. Like, we have a direct causal relationship. We know alcohol causes cancer and affects it. So for a doctor to say, nope, doesn't matter what you drink, and I've had several tell me that, doesn't matter what you eat. I had one doctor recommend I can drink a 2 liter of pop every day as long as I just drink something, just stay hydrated. It's like, oh, like we have research on that, fatty liver disease tied to drinking too much soda and sugary drinks.
It's almost criminal, man. That's criminally bad advice, is what that is.
You would think so, right? But it's funny because they literally can recommend that I drink 2 liters of Coke, but they couldn't recommend that you take whatever supplement. Like, this seems a little off. And again, not all doctors are like this. Some are, right? Like, half of them graduate in the bottom half of their class. That's just statistics. They're not all brilliant. Only a small percentage are in the top 10%. So, and research shows the longer they've been in the profession, the worse they're getting. And that's definitely been my personal experience as well. This just gives you a way to get answers. And so when we say, hey, can AI cure cancer? If you have a particular situation personally with cancer, whether that's, hey, I'm doing chemo and I'm going to do these other things like fasting, if you Google that, how does fasting affect chemotherapy and make it more effective, or CBD oil or so on. Now all of a sudden you have a plan that's beyond what your doctor can prescribe based on whatever the standard of care is, but is research and science back. Would I bring that to a doctor with something as serious as cancer? Yeah, I mean, I think you should. Will the oncologist say you're an idiot? Like, stop showing me this stuff. I don't want to read your stupid studies. Maybe. Right? But it's life and death. It's kind of worth asking.
What do you guys see as the next step here?
Sorry, say that again?
What do you guys see as the next step here? And that's a question for everyone. Like, where is this going? Because this is on an individual level, right? You'd say this, you're an oncologist, and then he sees 20 Brian Trillies every day, and he's like, I'm getting tired of this. Like, someone needs to sort this out.
That's it.
Where's this going?
That's exactly it. Right? So if on an individual level, Rob, you go in and you're the only person that doctor sees this year that's talking about this stuff, like, they're not going to change. Nothing's going to be different. But if every day somebody's coming in with not, oh, this YouTuber said, or my Aunt Nancy said this, or this other person, or this guy I know, he's cured himself from cancer by drinking carrot juice. Like, I'm sorry, they are going to laugh at you, and they're going to ignore you, and they're going to say you're an idiot. But if you say, hey, I've published research funded by the NIH or whoever else that shows that there is a causal connection here, like, what do you think of this? I wouldn't be argumentative. I wouldn't be trying to pin him into a corner. I wouldn't even ask him, I wouldn't even set him up. I would just say, hey, I came across this interesting research that seems relevant for my situation. What do you think of this? And be very positive about it, because that gives them the opportunity to not look like a jerk. That gives them an opportunity to say, oh yeah, let me see that. Oh, okay, this is pretty new. Well, the studies come out recently. That's an interesting point. Versus, hey, I heard CBD oil. Oh, you're an idiot. Well, by the way, I have a study that shows I'm not an idiot. Well, that's probably not going to get you the right result, right? Because now they have to retract their ego and back up. But again, if we're all doing this, if we're all saying, here's the research, here's the data, are you sure about this? Eventually they're going to have to start reading the information. Is there a better way? I mean, maybe there is, but that's what I'm seeing today. Like this is literally today. This
I think there's a more technical angle as well. Obviously, all the big players in AI are getting into healthcare. Amazon is, Google is, and NVIDIA just started getting into that. And so they are could potentially take at the angle where each doctor doesn't need to have all these people telling this or doing all these research individual for each individual study, each individual thing. And it can actually provide them with your current health facts, your current surveys you take, your current supplements you take, feed it in, does all the processing for you, gets all the reports, gets all the recent studies, and says, hey, doctor, here is a profile that, whatever, recommendation for the doctor, at least to see, get knowledge to understand, the most recent studies and how they actually correlate or related to you as an individual. So I think it could go that angle as well. Depends on if they can make enough money doing that, obviously, because that's they're doing it to make money as well. But there is that technical side that could also change how healthcare uses AI to make your healthcare better.
Yeah, I think that's a version of what we were saying earlier. The ideal is the doctor has all this information before you ever walk in because the AI is making these connections.
Yeah, but they have no financial incentive to actually make you better.
Yeah, so I just asked Greg, like, because I think this is a factor. Do doctors trust AI? And it's not looking good. The research on this seems to suggest that they're not. The point I think that needs to be made here is the AI is just your research assistant, right? You're not actually trusting AI to do anything in this in what we're recommending. So we're not saying, although there is definitely a research that shows this is useful, hey, use the AI to diagnose the tumor, to look at the scans. Again, there is research that shows that is actually starting to be very powerful and helpful. But we're just saying use the AI to find the connections, to find the things about your individual personal situation, and use those to advocate for yourself and to make sure you have the best plan. And I don't know why a doctor, first do no harm, would not be open to that. I'm not saying they all will be because there's egos, but in reality, they should be.
And I think it's like with any new technology, you have your strong supporters, you have your people who are weary, in a generation, in the doctors who are coming through in the next 10 years, they'll be much more trusting of AI, or at least accepting of the information AI can give it, or at least use it, like you said, as your research assistant, as your, so on. So the reality is, like new doctors are better than old doctors. New doctors now are going to be even better than new doctors were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, because they then have this access to all this stuff and they're actually familiar with it. They've been using it. Obviously, you're not going to have anyone going through high school and college right now who are not using ChatGPT or some large language AI model in their learnings or in their classes or in, you name it.
Yeah, you would hope so. And let's be fair, we're talking about sort of picking on doctors at the moment. The same applies to all the charlatans, or maybe no, they're not charlatans. Maybe they actually know what they're talking about. The people online that are like, you can cure cancer with carrot juice or whatever, right? Like, okay, is there any research to these things? So we started with that with the CBD oil, although that one's pretty common. I think you hear that all the time, sort of thing. But there are definitely much more abstract ones, and so that allows you to say, can carrot juice have a positive impact on cancer? So we can not only hold the modern medicine or the standard medicine to account, you can also hold all of the naturopathic or other ones. And the reality is there's truth in both to some degree. The challenge is, how do you pull it out? How do you figure out what's real and how do you figure out what's made up and how do you figure out what's emotional and so on? Well, the AI helps us do that research to figure out.
Is that a good question to ask? That seems like it was too general, that question.
Oh yeah, it was way too general. this one, so on colon cancer, breast cancer, leukemia, you would ask the question specific to your particular situation. And then I obviously would look at it and see.
But as you mentioned earlier, it's not a there's a divide. What can prevent cancer and what can actually reduce tumor size and cure cancer in essence, right? So I think that when you ask that question, I'm like, well, I'm sure there's a lot that says carrot juice can prevent cancer, so whatever,
Well,
but
this language
you're
here,
looking
Greg, I
for
think is really what you're looking at.
Yeah.
May have potential as a treatment for leukemia. May. All right, so that's questionable. Could potentially reduce cancer recurrence. Okay, so that's maybe. That's in breast
but
cancer.
that's not
This requires
curing it.
further
That's not
investigation. So these are not conclusive. I'm not reading this saying, oh yeah, carrot juice helps. The research is showing there might be a benefit here we don't know.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is one of those could say, oh yeah, it could help prevent it from coming back, which is different than, hey, it can help it from decreasing a tumor size. So
Right. If
reality,
you
the
currently have it, it's gonna
Yeah.
decrease. It doesn't appear that that's the case. Granted, it's only giving me 4, so you have to be very specific. Hey, if I currently have a breast cancer tumor, can carrot juice help reduce the size of it, right? And so that's where you're right, Rob. You want to get more specific. I was just kind of giving some sort of, hey, because if you go on YouTube, I guarantee you, if you looked for carrot juice curing cancer, somebody on YouTube saying it can, and they're not saying leukemia or what, they're just saying cancer, and like that's ridiculous. Like that's not how it works. And so you absolutely need to be specific about it, Rob. So I appreciate you pointing that out.
Yeah, sorry for being that guy. Do you want to wrap this up? Because I feel like we've got a minute left. Do you want to give us a takeaway here?
So the summary to me is today you can do things that we haven't been able to do easily before. You can use AI as your research assistant to find things that are personally relevant to you. So we start a conversation here. And so how I personally use this is I have 2 conversations going. One is with a GPT about my personal situation and all the things I'm dealing with, whether it's diet or my biometrics or multiple health issues and so on. And then I have another one open with my research. And so that's where I would say, okay, well, over here I'm trying a ketogenic diet. Hey, what are the impacts of ketogenic diet? Be sure you're positive and negative. What are the positive benefits for ketogenic for my particular situation? What are the potential risks? And you ask it both. Now I get the research and say, oh, wait a sec, this has this impact. Come back over here and say, oh, well, ketogenic diet requires a lot of oils, and these oils are healthier than these other oils. And now I adjust in my personal ongoing discussion based on the research that I had. This holds the doctors accountable. This holds the YouTube, influencers accountable. It just allows you to get to the truth a whole lot more efficiently than maybe we've ever had before.